Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast where today we're going to be discussing is loyalty in football dead? The genesis for this idea has come after the fact that Trent Alexander-Arnold has announced that he will officially be leaving Liverpool upon the expiry of his contract at the end of this season. And on the back of last weekend in Liverpool's 2-2 draw at home to Arsenal, Trent Alexander-Arnold did get booed as he did come on the pitch, and then subsequently his touches did get booed by a minority of the Liverpool fans. And so we're going to be trying to answer that question. It's a yes or no question, but the answer I think is very, very broad. Just generally, Toby, what are your first initial thoughts on Trent and the whole situation going on at Liverpool?
Yeah, I feel like maybe looking at it as a non-Liverpool fan definitely gives me a different perspective, probably to yourself and to other Liverpool fans. He's been at the club over 20 years, I think it is now, joining when he was just 5 years old. Boyhood fan all the way through the academy, and I think what a lot of Liverpool fans were hoping was tipped to be that future captain as well for Liverpool. Really, really difficult situation, I think, where it's not joining a rival club, it's not leaving in bad circumstances. So it's certainly not as bad as like a lot of moves that we may have seen from sort of other boyhood clubs to other teams. And it's like you said, it's not sort of a black and white answer to this one. It feels like a real grey area. And in a lot of ways, I can understand why Trent would want to move. And I can also understand maybe the frustration with Liverpool and sort of some of the stuff in the years building up to it. Maybe things that he was saying in terms of that he wanted to stay, he wanted to be captain. I can certainly see that maybe there were some mixed signals that, especially when it was announced he was going to be leaving, threw a lot of fans off.
Yeah, it absolutely did. And I think this is why I wanted to do this as a podcast with you, mate, because I think it's such a broad discussion that I think is worth having about loyalty in football. I don't think like one 10-minute or 15-minute video can cover the entire topic, and realistically we probably won't either. But we'll start off with Trent Alexander-Arnold because obviously that was the genesis for this idea and making this episode of the podcast. And I'll give my thoughts, obviously, as a Liverpool fan. And when the announcement came out that he was leaving, I was not surprised at all. I was actually surprised at how little I felt about it because of the fact that I felt like it was coming for several months and potentially even years now, with the fact that he was running down this contract. And if you are a boyhood fan of a club, you don't let your contract get run down with that short a time left. You will sign a contract before. So it didn't come as a surprise. I think though that I am still very much disappointed that he's leaving because of the fact that in terms of as a boyhood Liverpool fan, and his dream probably would have been to captain Liverpool, like you said, mate, and to also lead the club to glory, lift a trophy for the club. To then have the opportunity to do that, he's the vice captain, he's the next in line after Virgil van Dijk leaves. He's got everything he needs at Liverpool. And so the bitter pill that I think a lot of Liverpool fans and myself have to take is, despite everything that we can offer him, and I think Liverpool can offer him as much as they possibly can right now, I don't think there's any more they could offer him as a club, that for him as an individual that is still not enough, and that's on the footballing basis but also off the pitch, whether it's branding, marketing, whatever he wants to do post his football career. And that's tough to take. And I suppose if it was another boyhood club at another rival team, I'd be saying, do you know what, I can understand it makes sense. So it'd be a hypocrite of me to sit here and say that I think I resent him for doing that. But you can't help but feel that he is a world-class player in the positions who starts week in, week out. He's pivotal for the Liverpool side. And Liverpool losing a world-class player on a free transfer, that is always going to hurt, but especially more when he's a boyhood player as well. So that's my take on him leaving for now, without getting too emotional into it, as I'm sure I probably will later on.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think there's a few little bits that I think I can completely sympathise with Liverpool fans being upset, and maybe not the boos, but the reaction to it. I think with you, like you said, it being a free transfer, the club missing out on potentially receiving a pretty hefty transfer fee, you would think, if he had another year or two left on his contract. And I think his age profile as well is something that has thrown up a few more question marks. I think when I first heard the news and there was people talking about it from a more neutral standpoint, of that he's won every trophy in England, boyhood player, and it felt like people were saying that he's already a club legend, but I think only being 26, I don't know if he could really be classed as that anytime soon, and it feels like maybe he's leaving a few years too early to make that move over to Madrid to sort of be a real legend loved among the Liverpool fans. So that's, I can certainly see that. But then, like you said, from the personal side, maybe he's not bored, because that's certainly not the right word, playing for one of the best teams in the country in England, but just wants a new challenge, wants to go and try out a new league, maybe live in another country, and maybe sort of chase those personal accolades like he's spoken about previously in terms of the Ballon d'Or. And if you want to win the Ballon d'Or, your best chances are going to Real Madrid to try to do it, I suppose. So yeah, I can definitely see both sides.
Yeah, so you touched on a couple of points there. I mean, firstly, the fee and Liverpool not getting anything for it. And I've seen some people say that obviously he came from the academy, so he was in effect of PSR and FFP. He was a free player, so him going for a free, you've gained nothing, you've lost nothing, and he's given you all those fantastic memories. I can understand that point of view, and if you said that, I would completely agree. But I would come back and I would also say, well, actually, Liverpool wanted to give him a new contract. It's not just happened overnight that all of a sudden Trent has run down his contract. It's felt like it's been engineered, because the move to Madrid, the fact that he's going for free, it's all for Trent. Everything that's happened, it's for his benefit, and it's been at the detriment of the football club. And that's the feeling, is that maybe he would have signed a new contract, and maybe when it comes to speak about what loyalty is, and I've actually got the Merriam-Webster definition of loyal. Well, I haven't got loyalty, but loyal. Unswerving in allegiance. And that's just it. There's 3 words. Unswerving in allegiance. And what it probably implies, but doesn't specifically say, is it's probably unswerving allegiance no matter what, or whatever the circumstance. So if Trent was more loyal to Liverpool, I think he would sign a contract and say to Real Madrid, if you want me, and if you really want me, and you think I'm this magical piece of the jigsaw at right back, and you think I'm the future, then you will have to pay a fee for me. And that would then be, in my opinion, him being loyal to Liverpool. But of course, as a player, and on the other side of it, I can understand why he hasn't, because with the Bossman rule, with players being able to go on a free, I mean, if you think about the wages, the agent fee, the transfer fee that Real Madrid would have to pay if Trent signed a new contract, that is going to be a deal that is going to be incredibly unappealing for any club in world football to do. And therefore, I can understand why Trent has decided to run down his contract and leave on a free transfer. But like I said, that is for the benefit of Trent in its entirety, but to the complete 100% detriment to Liverpool. And the other thing you said there, I can't remember what you said there. You talked about the fee. You talked about something else there, mate. I can't quite remember. What was it?
Yeah, in terms of like his personal situation and understanding that maybe he wants a new challenge, a new chapter in his life, and especially as well potentially chasing personal accolades as opposed to sort of team trophies, that it feels like he has completed England, winning every trophy.
Yeah, that was it, mate. And it's an interesting one, and I want to get your take on it, because how many trophies is enough? Because obviously, if you think about, I hate myself because I'm about to do this, but I'm going to do the air quotes and go, big trophies, right? And I hate the fact that I've said it like that and I've done that, but it is what it is. So in terms of like Trent thinking to himself, he probably wants to win the big trophies. It's probably the Premier League and the Champions League, right? So Liverpool last won the Premier League before the season in 1920, and they haven't won the Champions League since 1819. Obviously, they got close a couple of times in the league, close a couple of times in the Champions League. But if you think about it, in the last 5 years, that means Liverpool have won, again, I'm going to do the air quotes, big trophy once in 10 attempts in those 5 years. So 5 times trying to go for it in the league, 5 times going for it in the Champions League. It's such a luxury position to be in. But how many times is winning a big trophy enough for him to be happy at Liverpool? Or how many more times does he feel he needs to win it to be considered like an absolute superstar outside of the game? Obviously, he wants to win like 30, 40 trophies at Real Madrid. And if he wants to, fine, good on him. He probably will get somewhere near that. But surely, like Trent has said in his own words, which is part of the hypocrisy, which is why Liverpool fans are annoyed at him, it means more when you win it with his boyhood club. But in this case, not enough for him to stay. So yeah, that was the other point about him going off to win trophies and personal accolades.
Yeah, and I think with Trent's situation, it's actually a really interesting one because, like you said, winning that Champions League, was it 18-19 you won the Champions League, and then 19-20 you won the league. So in those 2 seasons, that was so early on in his career that I think maybe things peaked a little bit too early at Liverpool. And I think once maybe he'd won those 2 trophies, it felt maybe in his eyes, just trying to see it from his perspective, that what's next, what more can I do at Liverpool to sort of match those highs? And maybe this move to Real Madrid is sort of like a bit of a reset. Like, they haven't had the best season for Real Madrid this year. I mean, they're still in the Copa del Rey final. They're still second in La Liga and quarterfinals of the Champions League. For most clubs, they'd take any day. But Real Madrid, it could be seen as a bit of a failure this season. And maybe as well, Trent seeing that, going over there, being an impact and making an impact in that side to have a better season next season and the few seasons on, is a challenge maybe that he feels he needs, and maybe that wouldn't happen at Liverpool if they win that Champions League or Premier League again. And maybe the season winning that Premier League again, maybe something just didn't feel quite right, and maybe that move to another league and to another country is that sort of next chapter that he feels he needs to get those highs of winning the trophies.
Yeah, I've got no issue with him doing it for himself, but I also don't hold strong goodwill for him leaving Liverpool, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I suppose you have to come on to the booing, obviously, don't we? Because, you guys clicking on this video, you will have seen the title, you would have seen what we're talking about, and you would have known we were going to have to talk about this. Do you want to go first, mate? What do you thought about the booing? Will I collect my thoughts?
Yeah, it's just I feel like he should have waited to the end of the season to announce it. Maybe hasn't done himself any favours with a few games left, and if he was booed coming back playing for Madrid, I'd understand it a little bit more. It just feels like it leaves a little bit more of that sour taste in your mouth when it's a home game and you're celebrating winning the league, and it's not a happy. Well, I wasn't going to be a happy goodbye anyway. But yeah, it's a strange situation that maybe you don't get as much. It's normally, like I said, when they're coming back. It was one of those things where when he first left, I felt like, oh, it's not that bad. I don't know why everyone's sort of so upset. But now on reflection, I can understand. And when the booing happened, I thought that's really disrespectful. But again, I think because I'm not a Liverpool fan, I think if you flip it, like in Arsenal's case, and we had a similar situation, I can 100% sympathise with the Liverpool fans in that situation. Not sure if I would boo myself. I don't think I would personally be one of the people booing, but if I was a Liverpool fan, I don't think I would be against other people sort of doing it themselves, I suppose.
Yeah, so I saw the game, I watched it, and then I thought to myself, are we actually booing? Like, I wasn't at the game, I was watching at home, and I just thought, no. Are we? Maybe? And like I said, if people want to boo, I disagree with that. However, I will not stop people from booing, because I think it's, one of the great parts of living where we do. It's freedom of speech. And if you want to boo, you can boo. And I think it's actually really divided the Liverpool fans base, because I think how I would have approached it if I was at the game was, I think I would have not acknowledged him coming on. I wouldn't have booed him, but I also wouldn't have cheered him. And I think, well, he talks a lot, Jamie Carragher, but I think one of the things that he has said in this whole thing, which has actually been very true, is a player like Trent Alexander-Arnold, he is the most talked about right back probably in history, and that's because of his unique skill set and how amazing he is on the ball. But also, the worst thing you could probably do to Trent is not talk about him. I think because of how he sees himself as a superstar. He wants to go after Real Madrid. He is a player who wants the headlines. And obviously with that comes the fact that he's probably going to get negative headlines as well. But if you decide you're not going to talk about Trent Alexander-Arnold, that's actually the worst thing you can do to him for his image, for his brand. Obviously you can boo him, and that will obviously go away as soon as he leaves Liverpool. And as soon as he goes to Madrid, I'm sure they'll see his quality and he'll show himself and prove that he deserves to be there, and then they'll love him. But to actually not acknowledge him, not talk about him, and like Liverpool fans were singing Conor Bradley's name, they're singing Steven Gerrard's name. I think I think that's what I personally would have done. But also, I don't begrudge any Liverpool fans for deciding to boo, although I didn't personally like it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think Trent is probably a character who I think won't take that booing badly in a way. I think he will think, and I think it actually does, is come from how loved he was at Liverpool as opposed to how angry the Liverpool fans are now. I think it's more sort of that disappointment where that booing is coming from, and how, like you said, that boyhood fan, academy player coming through, how well he's performed, that it's like a booing at the situation as opposed to him personally, because obviously last season and the seasons before, such a loved player by Liverpool, and rightly so. And like you said, with going to Madrid, we hear a lot of sort of talk about how a few bad performances and the media and the fans can really, really get on your back. And I think in that case, again, I think Trent's one of those players who's strong-willed enough to see that as motivation more than anything. And maybe in this case with the booing as well, see it as motivation that he knows he needs to really perform at Madrid. Otherwise, what was the point of all of this?
Yeah, and that's a big thing, because when talking about loyalty, are the Real Madrid fans going to be loyal to Trent if he decides, well, not if he decides, but if it doesn't quite work out for him and his performances aren't up to the standard that they require, especially in the defending? I don't think so. I think Real Madrid is going to be a very hostile place for him, but I think he definitely has the qualities to make it work. It's just about going out there and doing it consistently week in, week out, no matter what. And if he can do that, then I'm sure he will have a fantastic time. Let me ask you then, Toes. Do you think it is naive, because you hinted at the fact that maybe he should have released a statement about him leaving a little bit later? Maybe he's released it when he did was because he wants to go to Real Madrid in time for the Club World Cup.
Yeah.
Who knows what's going on behind the scenes? But do you think him putting that announcement when he did was the right time? And do you honestly think he expected to be booed?
Oh, no, 100%. I think a lot of it was to do with the Club World Cup, and I think maybe he would have expected a negative response and then a happy send-off on that last sort of game of the season, potentially. But yeah, it's a big risk, especially for a tournament that we don't know how. It's obviously this rebranding, this completely changing it, trying to make it this new big thing. Whether it's going to work, I'm not too sure just yet, but it feels like a big risk of him and his relationship with the club to do that and try and squeeze that in. I think he should have had that good send-off that he probably deserves, announce it over the summer a little bit later, almost like the fact he's sort of been deliberating it. It maybe shows a little bit more respect to them, as opposed to sort of partway through the season getting rid of that goodbye to try and squeeze in the Club World Cup. And then the only sort of hostile reaction he may have faced is when he comes back. And some people might see that maybe as like a coward's way out in a way, if he's trying to avoid that. But I think I don't see it from that point. It's more, I think it's just a little bit maybe more respectful to wait till the season's over, if anything.
Well, yeah, he's trying to clearly get in the good books of his future employees in Real Madrid by trying to get Liverpool to release him early, trying to force it so it's kind of... He's still trying to play both sides, and unfortunately I think he's failing at the moment. He's clearly not in Liverpool fans' good books, and I don't know what's going to happen with him in the future. But I would personally just be like, no, you've made your bed, you sleep in it, and you'll go when your contract's over. And if you miss a Club World Cup, that's your problem, not ours. And I think in this case, because Real Madrid are getting everything they want, they're getting the player they want, they're getting him for the price they want, which is nothing, and they were maybe getting him early for the Club World Cup. If you can do something to, put the whole work out of joint and just go, do you know what? Everything's gone your way, but we're going to do this one thing so you don't get it completely your way. I think Liverpool should do that. It's just no, actually, we're a big club as well, and just because you're a local lad doesn't mean you get to treat us any differently as anyone else would. So I would actually be like, do you know what? Don't let him go to the Club World Cup. Let him see out his contract and put him already in a bad stead with his future employees, if that is possible. But how do you think... Oh, this is a difficult question. But how do you think he fares in terms of legacy at Liverpool? Do you think he's... Well, he's definitely not a Steven Gerrard, because Steven Gerrard clearly, unfortunately, was the exception, not the rule. So it's hard to say that... Obviously, you would like all of your boyhood players to be a club legend like Steven Gerrard, but it's not going to quite work out like that. Is he in the bracket of like a Michael Owen or a Steve McMahon, or do you think he's more in terms of just a foreign player who's Liverpool are bored and then they've left the club? Someone a bit like, I don't know really, someone a bit like Fernando Torres? I don't quite know where his Liverpool legacy is going to be after he leaves.
I think Michael Owen is a really, really good base and a comparison to go off. I think that's actually spot on. I think somebody like Torres then had that big move to Chelsea. He had a good prime. Liverpool wasn't quite there. But Owen, I think, boyhood player, fantastic servant for the club. Maybe not, like you said, at that sort of legend status. Maybe sort of below, just a little step below that. Obviously, he did the same. He moved to Real Madrid. And then he had that dreaded move to Man United later in his career, which certainly knocked him down a little bit. So I think he's
a lot knocked him down.
Yeah, he's in and around there, I would say. It's interesting you bring up Steven Gerrard. Like you said, he is that sort of exception, I think, is a lot of the point. I think that's where this sort of grey area of loyalty comes in, that we sometimes maybe expect players to be a little bit too loyal based off a small sort of sample size of your Gerrards, your Giggs, your Scholes, your Maldinis. They don't come around very often, and still we sort of have these question marks over players' loyalty when it should be more so maybe praise for those who are so loyal, because like you said, it's so rare.
Yeah, it is. And to be fair, even when you were saying that, I mean, Steven Gerrard didn't even end his career at Liverpool. It was such a shame he didn't end up becoming a one-club man. But like, if we stay on and talking about loyalty then, I know you've got a couple of examples, but I've got the one about Kevin De Bruyne. Because obviously Manchester City signed him from Wolfsburg, I think it was in 2015. He spent a decade at the club. But he has come out in recent weeks and actually said that he wants to stay. But it's Manchester City who have decided that actually they're going to move on. So when it comes to loyalty, should a club be loyal to a player when the player is of no use? Because otherwise it just seems like loyalty is great, but only if it works for both parties and is convenient. Should Manchester City arguably be more loyal to Kevin De Bruyne as an example? What do you think?
Yeah, it's a really, really good point, and not just Kevin De Bruyne as well, as obviously with the news with Thomas Muller recently as well, not having a new contract off to Bayern Munich, which he's even more of a legend there. I mean, academy player came all the way through. Maybe the difference with those two cases that is quite interesting and contrasting is Kevin De Bruyne, still one of the best midfielders in the world potentially. Thomas Muller, more as that sort of cameo player for Bayern Munich recently. So Manchester City's one was really surprising that they didn't even offer him potentially even a 1-year extension. I think is really, really surprising. And I think maybe something that's not surprising when it's without sounding so... I don't want to disrespect Manchester City, but I think the way Manchester City are run compared to a lot of other clubs is more of that sort of business model. And it's maybe a little less surprising from them that they wouldn't offer De Bruyne, who I think is fair to say is a massive Manchester City legend, that new contract. And with the wages he's on, what they would see maybe that they would get out of him, it feels maybe more like a business decision, which again is really difficult. And how much like a business can a football club be run that it's no longer a football club? I think, like you said, it has got to go both ways a lot of the time. But I don't know this one. That's a really, really good question. It's a really good question. How do you see it?
I see no issue in a club offering a club legend like a Kevin De Bruyne or Thomas Muller clearly past their best, but can still deliver here and there. I think there's no reason why they couldn't rotate, be an experienced head in the dressing room, come on for games against, just to make cameo appearances, like you said, off the bench, sometimes play in games against lower opposition and be that experienced player on that side. I've got no issue with that. I mean, a perfect example of it, I think, is Luka Modric, funny enough, at Real Madrid at the moment. The way he's playing a bit part role, he's not really starting week in, week out. But I do think that offer probably comes with a lower weekly wage as a base salary, and there's probably more incentives on appearances made and starts if the player is fit enough and then gets themselves into the team because they're performing well. I think there's no issue with offering the player the contract. I think a personal issue probably comes from the fact that Man City with Kevin De Bruyne, Bayern Munich with Thomas Muller. They didn't even offer that player the option of that. I feels like with Kevin De Bruyne, I can't say too much about Bayern Munich and Thomas Muller because I know about it just on the headlines. I don't know about it in detail. But with Kevin De Bruyne, it doesn't even feel like Man City offered him that option of, we're not going to pay you £300,000 a week, but if you want to get paid £150,000 a week, and will heavily incentivize you based on appearances that you make, and especially starts, Kevin De Bruyne might have gone, well, I've been here for 10 years. My young family's here. I love the city of Manchester. I love playing for Man City. Do you know what? Maybe I will offer that. The fact that they didn't even offer that as an option is where I'm maybe like, okay, maybe the club should be more loyal. But actually, in all of this, what I have an issue personally with is probably us as fans. We will go, do you know what? Man City need to have a rebuild. Yeah, get rid of Kevin De Bruyne, get rid of his wages. And perhaps we're the problem as much as the clubs themselves. So I do think clubs should be more loyal sometimes to club legends when you think about it, because, you know, Kevin De Bruyne is arguably Man City's greatest ever player. Thomas Muller is, I think, up there for Bayern Munich's all-time appearances. I feel like these players, it feels weird for them not to play for their respective clubs that they do at the moment, and I don't really want to see them anywhere else.
Yeah, and like you said with Bayern Munich, like in terms of the way that I think they've sort of been in a lot of controversial moves, and a lot of those moves which are maybe the definition of disloyalty, in terms of your sort of Manuel Neuer moving from Schalke to Germany was a massive one. Mario Götze from Dortmund to Bayern, again, sort of that young superstar coming through. And then you've got the number of other of those Dortmund to Bayern Munich transfers, looking at Lewandowski, looking at Hummels, Süle, Rafael Guerreiro recently is another one. That it feels like if Bayern Munich are making all of those moves, maybe they should counteract that a little bit, and maybe have a little bit more loyalty to those players who have been loyal to them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like, do they need Wirtz and Musiala and Elise? Like, that's just like, surely
it's greedy. It's greedy, isn't it?
It is greedy. But at the same time, for Bayern Munich, they're probably not achieving what they want to do. I mean, they've won the Bundesliga, but they want to be semi-finals of the Champions League year in, year out, and want to be trying to win it year in, year out. So it is all about those marginal gains and improvements and financial for players and stuff as well. So there's that as well. But on that Dortmund Bayern Munich thing, I found was quite interesting. If you had a Dortmund shirt, Tobes, I'm not sure if you do or not, but if you had one player on your back, me personally, I'd have Marco Reus, because of the fact that he stayed at Dortmund during the entire time, during everything that was happened. He was there for the Klopp side. He was there up until recently when he moved to the MLS and joined LA Galaxy. But when I think of Borussia Dortmund, you ask me to think of a player, I think I do, and I think a lot of other people watching football nowadays will probably think of Marco Reus, because he was loyal. And that in itself, coming back to maybe Trent Alexander-Arnold, that in itself is a unique selling point and a brand and something you can leverage, because those Dortmund fans for Reus will be there for him no matter what, always. And similarly a little bit with Hummels, but Hummels made a move to Roma in Europe, so I'm not sure how Dortmund fans feel about that, but definitely Reus, because he went to LA Galaxy and, you know, kind of, if we're being honest, out of the eyeballs of everyone in European football. So yeah, I would get a Reus shirt, I would get his name, and I'd get his number on my back if ever I was to get anyone.
Yeah, and that's the thing with Dortmund. I think they've had a few funny transfers where it feels like maybe they've let players go for free to Bayern Munich where things haven't been the case. But I think when they've got young players who have played so well and they know when it's maybe time for them to move on, sort of like your Aubameyangs, Ousmane Dembele, Jude Bellingham, those players where it felt like they are going on to that very, very high elite level, maybe where Dortmund can't ascertain and keep those players and produce that quality all across the pitch, that they'll know that this isn't the sort of player to not to be loyal to, but to try and make them loyal to yourselves, if you know what I mean. Get that cash in, get that money in whilst you can, as opposed to a lot of these sort of big transfers between big clubs can whittle down to sort of going on free transfers, because they're still hopeful that these players are going to be staying around.
And I suppose this kind of links still back to Trent. I mean, all of it about loyalty and transfers is because Liverpool fans, And I like to think that we are, but I also know that Real Madrid and probably Barcelona are unfortunately the only two clubs where they are the pinnacle of football, unfortunately. And but Liverpool think of, I'm sure Scousers, because I'm not a Scouser, but Scousers think of themselves and Liverpool as the final destination for any top player or who wants to achieve. And the fact that they're winning now as well reinforces that point. So the fact that they lose a player like Trent, someone who's a boyhood fan as well, it hurts that little bit more. Whereas, like you said, if you were a player going from a side in the mid-table to then all of a sudden going to a side at the top of a league, in any league, then all of a sudden that seems as like acceptable. But there seems to be more of a furore around Trent because he's already kind of seen as being as the top club. Whereas if it was a Declan Rice from West Ham to Arsenal, no one bats an eyelid. West Ham fans go, do you know what? Best of luck. Grealish from Aston Villa to Manchester City, not a problem. Best of luck. And I think there are ways to leave your club, your boyhood club especially, in a way that it doesn't antagonize your fans. But leaving on a free clearly isn't one of them if you base it on what we've seen for Trent.
Yeah, that's 2 points that I literally have exactly written the same down, that I think loyalty is questioned, like you said, when it's from a big side, it's to a rival, or it's on a free, or it's a combination of all of those things. And like you said, those examples you had listed didn't have any of those, which is where that loyalty, I don't think, questioned. And another one that's maybe similar in terms of a player, an English player in the Prem, going to a foreign side is Harry Kane as well. It still feels like he is so loved at Spurs. Went to Bayern Munich, they got a decent amount of money from him, especially when he's 30 years old. But if you think back to that season before when he was potentially going to join Manchester City, if he would have done that move, how much more would that loyalty have been questioned? I'm not sure if it would have been much more in a way, because I still feel like the situation that Spurs were in, that jump to Manchester City or to Bayern Munich for Kane to get a trophy, felt like it was needed. And I think a lot of Spurs fans felt sympathetic for Kane in a way, that they knew that they had possibly the best striker in the world in their team. But the rest of the team weren't able to deliver. So I think they were able to separate that love for the club with the love for the player in that situation. Whereas, like I mentioned, with it being Trent going from what is a very big club who have won trophies to another very big club who have won trophies, that it's a lot harder to sort of disassociate that love for the player in the club.
And that I completely agree with you, mate, 100%. Harry Kane is the one where I have, I think, 29 or 30 when he left, depending on his birthday. It's a bit of an awkward one in the transfer window. But yeah, in terms of loyalty, he stayed longer than was best for him personally, because Spurs were not winning anything and were not competing regularly in the Champions League. So that self-sacrifice and not looking out for just himself, but looking out for the club as well. And then when he did leave, he left for 100 million. So the club got the money in for him as well. And the fact that he then went abroad, so he wasn't going to be directly competing for against Tottenham regularly. That was the perfect transfer and the perfect way to leave your boyhood club. But the issue is for Trent is because Spurs were not winning trophies and not competing, and Liverpool are, and now he's leaving for free. So it just reinforces the fact that could he have done something about it? Maybe, but I don't think if he signed a contract, Real Madrid would have come in for him. And so I suppose that's the only real way a boyhood player can leave their club and for it to be done in an amicable way. Do you think there is any way, shape or form that a boyhood player can leave their club if that team's successful and they are a key part of that team anyway?
I don't think, without getting some sort of reaction from the fans, 100% not. Whether it's seen as disloyal from the player themselves, I'm sure a lot of the times they won't see it like that. And like I mentioned at the start, there's so many different factors in terms of somebody's personal life as well, which I think as a fan you have a massive disassociation between that TV screen or even just between those stands and that football pitch, that you're watching these players play football. They're not players, they're people as well, and they're people first as well. At the end of the day, it is just their job as much as I'm sure they absolutely have so much passion for it, and how much passion we have for the club. At the end of the day, they are people just doing a job, and there's so many other aspects that can come outside of that. So I think a lot of the times when these transfers happen, they don't see it as disloyal because they've got so many other things going on as well that need to come into account. So the fans will struggle to take that into account. And like you said, any player leaving a big club to another big club on a free transfer, it's not going to go well. And I think a lot of the time the player will just take that as a sacrifice, maybe to sort of improve other areas in their quality of life, really.
Yeah, and I think as well, there are instances where players can leave their clubs. I mean, if you're not good enough for the first team, the club is not going to be loyal to you and they're going to release you. I mean, if you're a youth player or if you made it in the first team but you're not a regular starter and the club is willing to sell you because they get a good offer, that's a club not being loyal to you. But no one bats an eyelid at that, even if the player wants to stay themselves because it's what's for the benefit of the club. But yeah, I agree. I don't think there's any way that a top player in the top team can leave for free to another top team without getting some sort of backlash. And so,
yeah, can I just flip this on you really quickly, just whilst we're on this? In terms of if it was the other way round, say for example you had a really fantastic player, an elite player, staying at a club that maybe aren't performing well, do you see that as loyalty, or do you see that maybe as a lack of aspiration from the player?
well, like with Trent, it's difficult because you need in every instance is genuinely its own case, and you cannot really compare because it's always going to be slightly different. The one that I will use an example here is Martin Zubimendi last summer because he decided to stay and be loyal to his boyhood club, Royal Sociedad, and so now he's decided to make the move to Arsenal. And at the time, I remember a lot of English fans, because he was linked with Bayern Munich, Arsenal, Liverpool, I think maybe even Man City as a backup to Rodri at the time before they got Nico Gonzalez. Everyone was like, what's he doing? He's being loyal. I mean, yeah, you can understand it. But Real Sociedad weren't winning week in, week out. So at the time, I was like, oh, do you know what? It's a boyhood club. He clearly likes the Spanish mountains. Fair enough, you know? But you can understand it as well because I would see it as fair play. They're being loyal only if I think there needs to be a time frame on it as well. If
Yeah, and maybe a line of how bad the team are.
yeah, well, actually, even if you're how bad the team is, I mean, like, one of the examples I've got is when Juventus got relegated to Serie B. I mean, you had players like Alexander Del Piero, Gianluigi Buffon, Chiellini. They all decided to stay with Juventus in Serie B. They took pay cuts and they were like, no, this is a club, we'll be fine. And that was an example of them being loyal. And they went, it's going to be okay. And that was a while ago, if we're being honest. Do you think that potentially loyalty is no longer a thing in modern football and it's a thing of maybe the past?
I don't know. I think it certainly felt more prevalent. I don't have any numbers or anything to back it, but I mean, if you're looking at sort of the early 2000s, you had that really core United squad. You had all of the AC Milan, your Maldini, Baresi's sort of there for years and years and years. And then one that always sticks out for me is a player who maybe could have gone on to be one of the best players in the world and probably was in terms of qualities, Francesco Totti at Roma. Don't get me wrong, had an exceptional career there still for Italy and for Roma, but I think only came out with a Coppa Italia and maybe a league title. I think they may have won one whilst he was there, but he could have gone to any club in the world, genuinely. AC Milan, Juventus, and had a more sort of trophy-laden career, but he stayed there throughout his whole career. Absolute club legend, and still seen now as a legend of the game, despite not winning those trophies because of how good he was. And maybe Roma themselves are a side that are too good. But at the moment, I think with the way that football has moved, I think it's less on terms of players' loyalty being less, and maybe, as we said, clubs' loyalty being less, and transfers being so much more frequent and such a much, much bigger aspect of the game. With the game expanding, your leagues and your sort of outside of the top 5 leagues, your Portuguese leagues, your Belgian leagues, the South American leagues producing such incredible quality, and the globalization of the game, and how easy it is for clubs in mid-table Prem to go out and sign fantastic world-class talents, that I think loyalty has just naturally gone a little bit, and it's just one of those things. It's not a bad thing. If anything, it's made the quality of football probably better, with more transfers and players moving around, getting moves that suit them, getting more game time, as opposed to maybe players staying because they have less options to move on, and that could still be seen as loyal, even if maybe more offers and things came in, that we'd be in a different situation.
Yeah, I think the Bosman rule was absolutely massive, and I think also in terms of the Premier League revenue. Imagine that if you were okay. Let's take Carlos Baleba at Brighton. If we're being honest, the only clubs in world football who can afford to take Baleba out of Brighton are probably Real Madrid, Barcelona if they get the finances in order, PSG, Bayern Munich, and those are the only four sides probably currently in Europe that can afford him. And then the rest, you probably got 6 or 7 in the Premier League, and that's your market. And so if you do need to make a move to another club, then you're going to look at it and go, do you know what? I could just run down my contract. And that is a tactic that completely benefits the player, but it is also on the club to maybe just sense if that's what a player is doing. Realize that if in the negotiations this is kind of seems serious, the player really wants to be here, or if it's not, and it's then up to the club to then recognize that and sell them. But actually, I think with so much money in the English game, it skewed the rest of Europe. So players like Trent will go, actually, I'll have to run down my contract if I want to make a move to Real Madrid. And so I think that loyalty is a great idea, but I think in the modern game, unless you are a unless you are literally come through the Real Madrid or Barcelona U team and you're getting yourselves into the first team, I think and maybe Bayern Munich, actually, maybe Bayern Munich. I think for everyone else, you're probably born in the wrong place, and therefore you will always aspire to get to those clubs, but you won't necessarily always get there. And that's the other thing. You've got boyhood players who probably would have made the move, but didn't because they weren't good enough. Like, I mean, obviously, Jamie Carragher and Gary Neville have been talking a lot about loyalty and what that means with Trent and the whole situation. But they were players who were good, were like fantastic players, good enough for their clubs, but never good enough for a move to a bigger club, or a club was looking and thinking, oh, we'll make an offer of a substantial fee to take them out of their clubs. Whereas like someone like Steven Gerrard, Michael Owen, Trent Alexander-Arnold, Harry Kane, all these other players, they were good enough. So it would be interesting if those players ever got those opportunities, what they would have done. But I guess we'll never know really.
Yeah, and it felt like in their situations and now that unfortunately it's just a fact of the matter that Real Madrid is probably the pinnacle of football. I think as much as you can love your club and have the passion to play for them, I think every player's aspiration is probably to play for Real Madrid, to go there, be at the best club in the world and try and be one of the best players there as well. That's and I think if you're that sort of player where, and I think a lot of players are, to be a professional footballer, you really do have to have that motivation and that drive to keep trying to be the best. That is like the final step and the final hurdle for most professionals.
Yeah, absolutely. But then let me ask you, what do you make of forcing a move in terms of a player deciding that he doesn't want to play for the club anymore? Like I remember Dimitri Payet when he's at West Ham. Still, I think very much adored by the West Ham fans because of what he did at the club, because he's such an amazing player. But I think he refused not to play, and I think he was just like, I want to go back home to France, and I want to only go back to Marseille. And that ended up becoming a bit of a saga. I think like Coutinho as well would always have a back injury, even though he was never had a back injury. So what do you make of players refusing to play despite being under contract to force a move? Do you think that's like, well, I know you probably don't think that's acceptable, but do you agree with it as a tactic?
That's the thing. I don't see it as unacceptable, and I think if a player is asking to leave, the club should try their best to facilitate that. And I think a lot of clubs don't, and I don't think that's right from the club. I think if a player wants to leave and go to another club, they should be fine to. If the club doesn't want them to, see out their contract and go from there. I guess I think it's disrespectful from a club not to let them leave, but I do also think it's disrespectful not to the club but to the fans for the player not to play, because without the fans the game is nothing. And I think that's all the players. So I don't think the players particularly owe the club much a lot of the time, but I think when that reflects on the fans, that's when it's a real bad situation. And I think that's really disrespectful to the people who pay their hard-earned money to go and watch these games and essentially pay these players wages. Forcing out moves as well, I think sort of links on into that. We were talking about that sort of being a grey area, that loyalty, to a very, very dark side of loyalty, where that sort of links into your Sol Campbell's running out contracts, saying you're going to sign a new one, and then joining your biggest rivals. That's where you can get into real awful, awful situations with fans, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, especially in this country, Sol Campbell is probably if you said who is the least loyal football player, and even if you just want to say who's the biggest traitor, Sol Campbell is probably first, and you can absolutely understand
100%.
it, because I suppose Michael Owen making the move from Liverpool to Man United indirectly was also incredibly unloyal, but the circumstances were different. He's probably, but I think Sol Campbell directly from Tottenham to Arsenal, that was the one, and that was on a free transfer as well, wasn't it? Yeah, so that was the biggest one. I mean,
That was it was the fact he was saying like weeks before he left he's going to sign a new contract and he wants to stay, and then it just came. Yeah, there's, as an Arsenal fan, I think it's hilarious when you see the clips, but if I was a Spurs fan, God, he would be the most hated player in your history, surely.
Well, I'm pretty sure he definitely is. I can't think of anything else. But in terms of Spurs and Arsenal, one player who's probably more liked by Spurs than he's by Arsenal is probably Emmanuel Adebayor. Obviously made that jump from Arsenal to Spurs, but indirectly through Man City, and obviously that celebration against Arsenal after they sold him. So there's another one of, I don't think that's maybe a player not being loyal. I think it's more of I don't know. I think it's more of a villain arc than the player not being loyal, but there are a couple of players like that, like Owen as well. I mean, Carlos Tevez went directly from Man United to Manchester City, but they were willing to pay him the fees Man United wanted. So then it's like the club are willing to do it, and so it's a bit difficult as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I think with some of these moves, it stems less from... It goes from disloyalty to like a whole new region, doesn't it? Where I think the player must just be able to completely switch off and just put themselves first completely as above the club. I think a player in a club is a different relationship than a fan in a club. But I think when it's above the fans, that's where it starts to get like really sticky. Like you said, in England, Sol Campbell probably the biggest one. When you go to Europe and you look at Luis Figo going from Barcelona to Madrid and reading up on and seeing videos of when that happened, that was even bigger than Sol Campbell. I think the way that he did it, I think he won the league at Barca. He was on track to win the Ballon d'Or. Then moves to Real Madrid and they win the league that season. He does get the Ballon d'Or for the calendar year, sort of half Barca, half Madrid. The Barca reactions are absolutely mental. I mean, throwing pigs' heads onto the pitch, almost games being abandoned. I think at one point he didn't take corners for Madrid because of the reaction of the Barca fans, that they were just like, it's not worth trying to clear all of this up and get the game going. That one is as Sol Campbell is to Spurs, Luis Figo 100% is to Barca too.
Well, it's the fact that I can't remember who it was, but the Real Madrid president said, "Put me in the job, and I will buy Luis Figo from Barcelona," and he literally did. And he also won the Ballon d'Or that year. So after only playing for like 2 months for Real Madrid, he wins the Ballon d'Or and it's in Real Madrid's name. So yeah, just seeing that was, I think Figo's got to be like the biggest example of the least loyal. But at the same time, in that situation, do you blame the individual forward? I do, because he could have definitely turned around and gone no. But at the same time, I don't blame him as much as someone like a Sol Campbell or a Carlos Tevez, although the whole situation around it was definitely incredibly disloyal and more just in the way of spiting Barca and just saying, look at us, this is what we're going to do in the future and we're here to stay, so there's nothing you can do about it. So the whole situation around that was definitely incredibly disloyal from everyone involved.
Yeah, especially Barca sort of agreeing to that transfer. Whether Figo forced his way out, I'm not too sure, and I'd be quite surprised if it was that way because he was playing so well at Barca, and Barca were one of the best teams in the world at that point. So really strange one. But I have got one more just whilst we're on this because I've just been doing some research on it. This one I've never heard of this one before, and this could be maybe the worst one. This could be worse than Figo and Sol Campbell. And it's, have you ever heard of a man called Mo Johnston?
Is he a Canadian?
I don't think so. I think he's Scottish. I assume he's Scottish based on the fact that, well, essentially he was a bit of a Celtic legend. He played for a number of years for the club, and then he went to France basically from Celtic, as sort of maybe towards the end of his career. Went to Celtic, went to France after Celtic, and then on his way back from France, he said, "Okay, I'm going to rejoin Celtic and retire there." And he was in the Celtic stadium. It was basically announced that he was going to re-sign for Celtic, walking around with the new kit, his new name, his new squad number, all ready to go. And then in a few days' time, he's sat in the Ibrox and being announced as Rangers' new signing. So just completely throwing away everything he's done at Celtic, let down all the fans, and gone to what could potentially be the biggest rivalry in world football. And I'm pretty sure I saw that he no longer lives in Scotland because of the threats and stuff that he's had from Celtic fans. It was that bad.
Yeah, well, I just googled him now, mate. I've never heard of him before, but he joined Graham Souness's Rangers. At the time, Catholics had not been knowingly signed by Rangers nor employed in any prominent roles.
Yeah. He was the first Catholic to play for Rangers after World War II, which was a massive thing, obviously, as well, with it being Catholic and Protestant, Celtic and Rangers. So, yeah, another reason why that was such a controversial move.
Yeah, well, he played most of his career in the MLS for Kansas City, but he won 2 league titles for Rangers and scored 46 goals in 100 games. Eek. Yeah, that is not good at all. But yeah, are there any other traders that we mentioned, or we'll see kind of like the big one, the final one?
There is another one that was interesting that I didn't know as well, which was Harry Kewell, boyhood academy Leeds player. Absolutely loved there. Then obviously went to Liverpool, which was maybe a little bit controversial at the time, but not like a massive rivalry between the two sides. But essentially, when Leeds had a UEFA Cup game in Turkey against Galatasaray, 2 Leeds fans were actually stabbed in a fight before the game by Galatasaray fans. Massive controversy. Leeds essentially hating Galatasaray for a number of years and doing loads, I think, to sort of support the families of these fans that were killed, and big thing at the time that blew up in the early 2000s. And then Harry Kewell unfortunately did make a move to Galatasaray later in his career, which was, I think, made Kewell really go from that sort of boyhood Leeds legend to somebody who has left a really sour taste there and is quite hated by a number of those sort of Leeds ultras in a way.
Wow, yeah. I mean, obviously I remember him vaguely from his time at Liverpool. That was another one I didn't know about. But I think like nowadays footballers are very clued in. They've got teams around them. Surely they would know, like, okay, do you know what, you might have to be wary of this, because especially I think in the post-footballing career, like the reason why Sol Campbell is not doing as much potentially media stuff or coaching stuff as much as he would like probably is because of the fact that he made decisions in his club career that reflects his post-game career. And so you need to be incredibly wary of that if you have an intention of either going into managing, going into punditry, going into owning a football club, going into being a brand ambassador. These things reflect on you as an individual. And so if you make these unloyal moves, they're going to come back and bite you further down the line, even though you think it's all fine and dandy at the moment. I mean, I suppose Beckham was the one where probably he left Man United and it was like, oh my god, he's even Man United. But even then you kind of knew about it and it worked out okay. And I suppose he's as Mancunian as you can get without actually being from the immediate area. So yeah, I think players need to be incredibly careful of what they do, and I think being loyal actually goes in your favor more than not being loyal, especially in the post-game career. But I can understand in your in-game career. I mean, it's I suppose you got to do what you got to do, even if it annoys a few people.
Yeah, pretty much. And I think these moves, these like crazy moves like we were talking about in terms of Johnston and Tevez and Sol Campbell and stuff, I think those are a lot less frequent. I still think we do get moves between sort of those tier 2 rivals, like maybe your Arsenal and your Chelsea, or your sort of, who else would we have? Those sorts of rivalries, I think are.
But actually, even if it's those, sorry, mate, but even
please.
if it's those players, it's never the players on top of their game at the peak age, performing week in, week out. It's your Jorginhos to Arsenal, it's your Petr it's the players who have already gone over down that hill.
Yep.
It's never the peak players. If it is the peak players, like it is with Trent, then that's when it starts to become a bit of an issue. They're deemed to be as unloyal.
Yeah, that's pretty much summed it up perfectly. I was going to say, I think with the modern game and the advice that they have is that they can do these transfers when the moment's right, where it's not going to have as much of an impact. And I think maybe that was something, like you said, that wasn't the case 20, 30 years ago, where it was so much more focused on the player's playing career and like those sort of impacts on like even like social media, let alone their post-game career, is a massive thing. The amount of money that players probably make from social media and the marketing side is something that would probably be too much of a gamble for them to risk making those moves. And I think something that probably their agent and the fees that they're getting is something that they would strongly advise them against because of that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've covered everything. Is there anything else that you really want to say or you feel like we haven't covered?
Yeah, maybe just to wrap it up and go back round to Trent, and obviously a lot of these players we've talked about, we know how their moves have gone. We know that Sol Campbell was an incredible Arsenal player, amazing career there. Carlos Tevez had a decent spell at Manchester City as well. With Trent and all of this backlash and stuff, how do you think his stint is going to go at Real Madrid? And do you think that move is going to be worth it for him?
It all depends on his football, because that's what it all comes back down to. We can talk about loyalty, not being loyal, brand off the pitch. It all comes down to what you do on that football pitch. I think it will work out for Trent, because I think he is such a good footballer on the ball. And actually, because of all the criticism that he's got, people forget that I think he's actually become a little bit underrated in his defending. He's not as bad as people make him out to be, especially on social media, but he's not world class. So I think when he comes up against wingers in La Liga, they're going to be a bit slower in terms of pace, which is going to be good. I think they'll be more technical and more tricky, which will be a different thing for him to be able to cope with. But I think he has the capabilities of doing that. I think he's got to hit the ground running. And not only that, I think he's got to sacrifice himself for that Real Madrid shirt. The amount of times you hear about Bellingham picking up a bit of a knock or taking painkillers or injections to get through a game and still playing and still performing at an incredibly high level, he is doing that at the expense of his own footballing career for the sake of Real Madrid and the badge. And Trent needs to do something similar and needs to go above and beyond to prove himself to the Real Madrid fans. Because I have seen on social media that some Real Madrid fans aren't what's the right way of putting it? They aren't over the moon with him signing. They think that Dani Carvajal, Lucas Vazquez are better servants of the club, obviously being Spanish, come through the youth centre. I think there is a little bit of like, well, let's see what you've got. So he does have to prove himself. I think he will be fine. I think he will do well. I think Real Madrid will do well. I mean, obviously he's got a fantastic coach coming in Xabi Alonso as well. So I think he will be fine. In terms of what it means for Liverpool and his legacy, he will always be... I don't know. To be seen, yeah. I think there are players who've come back, like Fernando Torres, when he moved to Chelsea. I never thought in a million years he'd be playing for Liverpool in a Legends game ever again. And people be singing his name at Anfield, and they'll all be begging for him to come on the pitch and play. Stranger things have happened. One thing he cannot do, he cannot play well when Liverpool do eventually play Real Madrid, because they will with the new Champions League format. They will play each other. He cannot play well, because if he does, then it will just increase the resentment. Anytime he plays for Liverpool against Liverpool for Real Madrid or any other club, he's got to play really, really badly. But then also, if and outside of that, he does really, really well for himself and the club, then I think people can go, oh, okay, that's fine. But as long as he doesn't knock Liverpool out of the Champions League, he should be fine, I think, and time will heal. But I also don't know. He could be in the same bracket as Michael Owen. I really don't know.
Yeah, let's wait and see for the Champions League final next year when he scores a 90th minute free kick to winner. Then yeah, I think there'll be a lot more boos than we've seen recently.
Yeah, well, if that happens, would he celebrate? He'd have to, maybe.
Or yeah, I feel like he wouldn't. Which is yeah.
Don't know. He said this means more, and then he's left. I don't know. You can't really take him for his word anymore, can you?
No, very true, very true. We'll just have to wait and hope for that. That's the dream scenario right there.
No, it's not, because I would want Liverpool
as a neutral. Oh
yeah, of course. So let's finish off by answering this question: is there loyalty in football, or is it dead? What do you think?
Yeah, I still 100% think there is loyalty. I think there's a number of good examples of players at clubs now that have shared loyalty with the club themselves. I mean, you look at, like you said, Vasquez and players like Nacho Fernandez at Real Madrid, I think have been rewarded for their loyalty by the club, and the club have been loyal to them, keeping them on as sort of squad players and players in that dressing room. I think maybe loyalty is shown in slightly different ways, and the game has changed a lot. Players moving to other leagues, to new challenges, I don't think is always a sign of disloyalty, and that it can be shown in different ways these days. And I think the game itself is less loyal, but I think to put that on players personally being less loyal is maybe a little bit unfair. How do you see it?
I think generally there will always be loyalty from fans to their clubs. They will like to be loyal to their players, the managers, even owners. However, all those things will come and go. The fans will always be loyal to the institution of their football clubs, and I think that will never change. I think that now you will get loyalty in some instances from certain players, some certain managers. However, I do think that loyalty comes at a price. It's got to be convenient for all parties involved. And in that case, when that does happen, you can look back very fondly and go, oh, wasn't it great? But I do think that loyalty can also be bought nowadays. So I think there is loyalty, but expect it to be the exception, not the rule. If you expect loyalty to be the rule, I think you'll be disappointed. And yeah, and on that very bitter ending, that is the end of this week's episode of the podcast. Thank you everyone for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like so you know that you enjoyed it, and we can do more videos like this where we just have a bit more of a general chat. If you want to see more content like this, there is some videos up on the channel. Give it a subscribe so you can stay up to date on all of our future uploads. And also a big thank you to everyone else who's been recently subscribing, commenting and liking our recent episodes of the podcast. It has meant a hell of a lot to myself and Toby, and we hope to see you all very soon in the future as well. Take care.